December 19th, 1944. Outside the snow-dusted village of Noville, German Panther tank crews were reporting something truly impossible. American tanks, seemingly everywhere, would materialize from the thick fog, deliver a devastating shot to a Panther's vulnerable flank, and then vanish into the mist before the lumbering turret could even begin to respond. Moments later, the same phantom attacker would strike again, from a completely different direction. German intelligence, bewildered, informed 2nd Panzer Division headquarters they were facing an entire American armored division at Noville. They were wrong. The Americans had a handful of tank destroyers, 18-ton vehicles with armor so thin it couldn't withstand a single hit. Yet, the Germans couldn't hit them. This was the M18 Hellcat, the fastest tracked vehicle of World War II. And on that freezing morning outside Bastogne, raw speed was proving far deadlier than the heaviest armor. The German war machine had engineered the most feared tanks in the world. The Tiger, the Panther, monsters capable of obliterating Allied armor from over a mile away. But these killing machines harbored a critical vulnerability that German engineers never quite overcame. Their turrets relied on the main engine for power. The Tiger one, for example, used a hydraulic traverse system tied to the gearbox. At high engine RPM, a full turret rotation might take about 60 seconds. But tanks don't fight at high RPM. They engage while stationary or crawling with engines at idle. At idle, that same Tiger turret could take up to 4 agonizing minutes for a full rotation. And if the hydraulics failed, the crew faced 720 turns of a handwheel for just 1 rotation. The Panther was an improvement, but still deeply flawed. At combat idle, traversing just 90 degrees took a critical 15 to 20 seconds. This wasn't a minor inconvenience. It was a fatal flaw against the right enemy. In 1941, a far-sighted lieutenant colonel named Andrew Davis Bruce took command of the Tank Destroyer Tactical and Firing Center. His mission was singular: figure out how to stop German panzers. Bruce meticulously studied the Blitzkrieg, analyzing every engagement where Allied tanks had confronted panzers and lost. He arrived at a revolutionary conclusion that defied everything the Army believed about armored warfare. Tank destroyers, he argued, should be fast, not heavily armored. A puncher, not a slugger. His philosophy was deceptively simple. German tanks possessed thick frontal armor and powerful guns, making a head-on engagement suicidal. But they were slow, their turrets even slower, and their side armor notoriously thin. A fast vehicle could outflank a panzer before its turret could traverse, deliver a killing blow to its side, and then vanish before the rest of the column could react. The Army thought he was insane, but they built the vehicle anyway. For the crews who would drive them, however, Bruce's theory was a terrifying reality. He was asking them to trade steel for speed, to bet their lives on outmaneuvering an enemy determined to destroy them. Buick Motor Division secured the contract in 1942, assigning Harley Earl's design studio to the project, the very same team that would later craft the iconic tail-finned Cadillacs of the 1950s. What they created was utterly unlike anything else in the American arsenal. The M18 weighed a mere 18 tons. A Panther tipped the scales at 45 tons. A Tiger, a staggering 57. This drastic weight reduction was achieved by stripping the armor down to an almost unbelievable minimum. The frontal hull was just 13 millimeters thick. The turret face only slightly thicker at 25 millimeters. Standard infantry rifles couldn't penetrate it. Everything else could. When crews first saw the specifications, they were horrified. 13 millimeters wasn't armor, they joked. It was merely there to keep the wind out. Inside that hull, You weren't protected. You were just hidden. The engine was a Wright R975 radial, the same aircraft engine found in the much heavier Sherman, but powering a vehicle half its weight. The result? A blistering top speed of 55 miles per hour, making it the fastest tracked armored fighting vehicle of World War II. They gave it a name that perfectly matched its aggressive personality: the Hellcat. The numbers told the story. At 30 miles per hour, an M18 covered 44 feet per second. In the 15 seconds a Panther needed to traverse 90 degrees, a Hellcat could travel over 600 feet, 200 yards of lateral movement. That was more than enough to stay ahead of the gun barrel. German gunners faced an impossible calculation: lead the target and hope it maintained course, or track it and watch their shells land where it used to be. Either way, they were likely to miss, and they were only going to get one shot. Because, while they were traversing, that Hellcat was lining up a devastating 76mm round on their thin side armor. The M18's own turret was fast, but that wasn't the real advantage. The entire vehicle could reposition faster than a German turret could turn. That was the math of survival. And at Bastogne, that math would be tested. December 1944. The Wehrmacht unleashed its last desperate offensive into the Ardennes. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion was attached to the legendary 101st Airborne Division at Bastogne. Their commander was Lieutenant Colonel Clifford Templeton. When German armor from the formidable 2nd Panzer Division threatened the village of Noville, north of Bastogne, the 705th was sent to reinforce the line. They joined Team Dobbins, a mixed force of Shermans, Hellcats, and paratroopers from the 506th. The commander of Team Dobbins was Major William Dobbins, a mere 26 years old, and he was about to confront an entire Panzer division. The fog was so dense that engagements often occurred at point-blank range. At that distance, the Hellcats' thin armor was a death sentence, but the Germans had to hit them first. Inside the Hellcats, the tension was suffocating. The M18 had an open top, no roof, leaving crews exposed to freezing rain, sniper fire, and the deafening roar of battle. In the fog, every shifting shadow seemed to be a tiger. The 705th developed a technique that would quickly become legendary. A Hellcat would race to a street corner in Noville. The crew would spot a Panther through the fog, fire one shot into its flank, then instantly engage full reverse at maximum speed. By the time the Panther's turret traversed to return fire, the Hellcat was already gone, behind a building, down an alley, repositioning for the next strike. Moments later, the same Hellcat would reappear on the opposite side of the German column. Another shot. Another kill. Another disappearance. The Germans simply couldn't track them. Every time they turned to engage one threat, another materialized somewhere else. Reports reaching 2nd Panzer Division headquarters grew increasingly alarmed. They were being hit from all sides by what they estimated was a full American armored division. They were fighting a single reinforced battalion, led by a 26-year-old major and a handful of tank destroyers with incredible speed. Speed couldn't save everyone, of course. With only 13 millimeters of steel, any hit was usually fatal. German 75mm rounds would pass clean through both sides of the hull. Crews caught in the open died. Those who misjudged their timing died. And those who simply got unlucky faced a gruesome reality. The M18's open turret meant that an artillery air burst or a mortar round didn't need a direct hit to be lethal. Shrapnel rained down directly onto the men inside. It was a fast ride, but it was a cold, open grave if you stopped moving. Colonel Templeton drove his men relentlessly because he knew the alternative was worse. Static defense meant certain death. Movement meant survival. Over December 19th and 20th, Team Dobbins and the 705th destroyed over 30 German tanks around Noville. The village eventually fell. The American force was simply too small to hold against the full weight of the 2nd Panzer Division. But they had bought time. Critical hours for the 101st Airborne to establish the defensive perimeter that would hold Bastogne. Templeton survived the Bulge, continuing to command the 705th through the drive into Germany. On March 1, 1945, an artillery shell struck his command post. He never lived to see the victory his tactics helped achieve. 4 months later, a different Hellcat battalion would prove the math in a completely different way. The 805th Tank Destroyer Battalion was the only unit in Italy fully equipped with M18s. Their commander was Lieutenant Colonel Herbert Fowler. The crews, in a small act of defiance, painted unauthorized black cat logos on their turrets, a cartoon feline biting a tank on an orange disc. Command ordered them to remove the markings. They didn't. It was a small rebellion, but it mattered. They were driving the most fragile vehicles in the theater. That cat logo was their way of baring their teeth. If they were going to die in these things, they were going to do it with their own identity. In April 1945, the Allies launched their final offensive in Italy. After months of grinding through the Apennine Mountains, the Po Valley stretched ahead like a billiard table. German forces were in full retreat, columns of trucks, half-tracks, and tanks streaming north toward the Alps. The soldiers called what happened next the rat race. The Po Valley was perfect Hellcat country, flat, open, with no hedges or forests to slow them down. The 805th crews found themselves driving parallel to retreating German columns, not behind them, but beside them. At 30 miles per hour, they would pull alongside and open fire, their 76mm guns raking trucks, half-tracks, and tanks from the flank. German gunners frantically cranked their turrets, but the geometry was hopeless. By the time a gun came around, the Hellcat that fired had already moved 200 yards down the column. It was a drive-by shooting on an armored vehicle scale. And because the 805th was the only Hellcat battalion in the entire theater, German intelligence was completely baffled. A black cat spotted outside Bologna in the morning would be reported 50 miles north by afternoon. The pursuit moved so fast that crews couldn't even guard the prisoners they captured. They simply disarmed the Germans and pointed them to the rear, then kept moving. The adrenaline was constant. Crews later recalled the surreal nature of the chase, speeding past enemy infantry who were too stunned to fire, the wind whipping through the open turret, the feeling of being in a hunt rather than a conventional battle. By the end of the war, M18 Hellcats had compiled the highest kill ratio of any American tank or tank destroyer, 526 confirmed kills. The overall exchange ratio was roughly 2.4 to 1, better than the Sherman, rivaling the heavy-hitting M10, better than anything else the Americans fielded. Critics pointed out that Hellcat crews were elite, highly trained specialists who might have succeeded in any vehicle. Historian Stephen Zalaga called the M18 a poorly balanced design, arguing that its success was attributable to the training and dedication of its crews, not the vehicle itself. Perhaps he was right. But those men chose how to fight. They chose speed, flanking, and hit-and-run tactics because that's what the Hellcat allowed them to do. A different vehicle would have forced different tactics. Different tactics might have gotten more of them killed. The M18 Hellcat was retired almost immediately after the war. The tank destroyer doctrine itself fell out of favor. Future American tanks would be heavily armored main battle tanks, and the cruiser philosophy was largely abandoned. But the lesson of the Hellcat remained. German tankers couldn't hit what they couldn't track. 15 seconds of turret traverse was an eternity against a vehicle moving 44 feet per second. The Panthers and Tigers were, by every conventional measure, superior tanks, thicker armor, bigger guns, but conventional measures didn't account for an 18-ton vehicle that could be somewhere else before you finished turning your turret. At Noville, the 705th used speed to survive against impossible odds. In the Po Valley, the 805th used speed to annihilate a retreating army. Both proved the same undeniable truth.